hope your coffee is warm, because today the whole set of Duskmourn has dropped and we are looking at the most unique concepts of the set. And I haven't been limiting myself to 10 anymore, because I think this house needs a little bit more space. I went to 11. But those are all of the unique concepts that I could find, and it's a lot. Firstly, there's the rooms, and I think this is the most interesting concept. And if you just want to hear about the most interesting concept, then just stop after this one. But this is about rooms, and rooms are a very simple concept at first, because they are an enchantment that's actually two enchantments. So you play the first one and then later you can add the second one. But the interesting design principle here is that all of the rooms can work together with the two parts of their enchantments very well. And we have found a way to make cards stronger and weaker at the same time, and that is often very fun. For example, Dazzling Theater down left is one part of this enchantment. It says creature spells you cast have Convoke. So creature spells can become cheaper when you tap other creatures that are already on the battlefield, meaning it's easier to cast more creatures when you have them untapped. Then Prop Room is an enchantment that says untap each creature you control during each other player's untap step, meaning they play very well together, because if you find a way to cast your creature spells on your opponent's turns, you can already pop off really quickly and have 4 turns. This is often part of a combo already, and having them on one card is a strength. But the card is also weaker, because when you remove the room, both of the enchantments that you played for 7 total mana are gone. Now, there are some synergies already as well. Of course, every set has them. For example, Central Elevator says when you unlock this turn, search library for a room. So basically a strong way to find the room you exactly need. Review it, put it into your hand. Then Promising Stairs, 3 mana, says at the beginning of your upkeep, survey 1, and you win the game if there are 8 or more different names among unlocked doors of rooms you control. Meaning, one room that you fully unlock the 2 enchantments from count for 2 doors that you have unlocked, so you will need 4 rooms totally unlocked, for example. Then there is, for example, Ghostly Dancers in the middle here. When it enters, return an enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand, which can be a room, or unlock a locked door of a room you control. Some of the rooms are very expensive and have very cheap parts of their rooms attached to them, so you can easily get a lot of value from this. Playing this for 5 mana can easily net you another 5 mana. Then Eerie, whenever an enchantment you control enters and whenever you fully unlock a room, so both parts of opening a room do trigger for Eerie. You create a 3/1 white spirit creature with flying. That's also a very strong effect, and I think this really shows us how we can stay in the game, maybe even get aggressive with it while we are opening these rooms. And there is an alternate win con, so that's very fun as well. There's also a 5-color commander for this already. It's Marina Vandrel, sort of the owner of the house. When she enters, reveal the top 7 cards of your library and you put all enchantment cards from among them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of the library in a random order. Meaning you can at most draw 7, but probably you will draw 2 or 3. Then you can tap her to lock on or unlock, which I find very interesting, a door of target room you control. Unlocking a door means, of course, returning the room and enabling you to open it again. Now, there are some rooms that allow you to have 1 trigger when you open it, so this can be a very strong way to sort of lock the room back and then opening it back later. Next up is Doomsday Excruciator. It's a 6 mana creature And not even a legendary, but very interesting for commander. Doomsday Excruciator says when it enters, if it was cast, so you will need to pay the 6 sort of honestly, each player exiles all but the bottom 6 cards of their library face down. 6 mana for a 6/6 with 6 cards left in your library, and you will have a lot of cards exiled. And I would say this is a very interesting way to almost die yourself, but also your opponents might die pretty soon. So you will need a way to have your opponents draw more than you do. But also at the beginning of your upkeep you draw a card. So this gets a little bit less easy for you because, well, you will be drawing a bit faster than your opponents. So you will have to figure out a way to make sure your opponents draw faster or mill faster than you do. And I think this is a pretty fun finisher because it doesn't kill your opponent right away, but almost. Next up, we're getting to a little bit of a less unique, more transforming the format kind of way. Kaidobane of Nightmares is a new concept because you get an emblem with ninjas you control get +1/+1 for Kaido's +1 ability. And having an emblem creator on a +1 ability I think is pretty strong, because even if Kaido is removed, your ninjas still get the +1/+1 for every time you got Kaido on the battlefield. And I think this makes for a very strong commander in that sense. Now, of course, you will put Kaido in, for example, your Yuriko deck and have a ninja focus deck that is a lot stronger after Kamigawa already, and Kaido just adds so much. And there are many ninjas that really would benefit from a bit extra power, especially when they have ninjutsu as well, and you can very easily get them onto the battlefield and immediately boost them with those emblems. Next up is the Meathook Massacre. Not new, but is, I think, the first effective way to do it, because Gisa already did this. Gisa said at the beginning of your upkeep, put all creature cards exiled with Gisa, so all creatures that basically died, onto the battlefield under your control, but they gained this decayed, and this ability was on a creature, so it was very easy to remove. Now Meathook Massacre removes the downside of the cards being decayed, meaning that they couldn't block, and when they attack you had to sacrifice them at the end of combat, and is still just 4 mana. It does need to be in a sort of mono black deck or a very heavily focused deck on the color, but it says when it enters, each player sacrifices X creatures. So I don't even think you want that part too badly, but you could. Then whenever a creature you control dies, you may pay 3 life to have it returned under your control with a finality counter on it. Now any ways to stop those counters from coming onto your creatures will be very strong, but not even necessary. This is great value. Then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, they may pay 3 life, so it isn't unconditional, but it is on an enchantment, and that will be harder to remove. If they don't, return that card under your control with a finality counter on it. Now, for one, this will help you to return your creatures onto the battlefield as well. You will have a way to force your opponents to lose life every time they lose an important creature they don't want you to have. And I think it's just better that this is on an enchantment. Now Vel'Gothoth is an unconditional way to do this again. 9 mana though, so I kind of disqualified it right away, but this is a way to do it. 9 mana, flying lifelink 9/9, so you have a big creature and it has ward, so a little bit of protection, but your opponent will have to sacrifice 3 non-land permanents, giving them to you basically. If a card you didn't control would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you exile it instead, and during your turn you may play cards exiled with Vel'Gothoth by paying life instead of its mana cost. Now, this does mean that when your opponent sacrifices 3 non-land permanents and you do get to your turn, you get to play them. So it's a little bit of an extra cost when they start to target Vel'Gothoth. But I think the most important part here is that it's 9 mana and that's really hard to cast, but if you want to do it, then go off. Next up, I think this is actually a really interesting thing, but a little bit hard to do, and because it's so hard to do, it gets turned into an old format, but let's talk about it. It's Nico Light of Hope. It's a commander, if you want, that creates 2 shard tokens, and then for 2 you may tap it to exile a non-legendary creature you control. Shards you control become copies of it until the beginning of the next end step, and you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step as well. So it's a slow flicker, but during the time that the non-legendary creature is removed from the battlefield, your 2 shard tokens get to be that creature for the remaining time. Now, why I said this gets turned into an old format is because I think the strongest way to play this is by flickering Nico Light of Hope, flickering the light out and in again. Also, Nico also is a sort of flicker commander, but a slow flicker commander, which is a little bit slower, or worse. That's what I mean. It does work with the old Nico, which also creates shard tokens, X shard tokens for how much mana you put in. But I think the strongest way to play this is with cards like Ephemerate, enabling you to exile the creature, then returning it to the battlefield immediately. And doing this to Nico will mean that you get a lot of extra shard tokens for a low price, and then you can turn them all into a big creature and win the game. I think that's a very interesting thing, that the shard tokens, which are very niche, now become really strong. And I think that's a new concept on its own. Next up is a part of the concept which is new, because this card stops your opponent from gaining life, which isn't new, but it does it for the rest of the game. Whenever it is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any other target, and if a player is dealt damage this way, they can't gain life for the rest of the game. If you can do this to all of your opponents, that's of course really strong, because then you can deal damage because you're a red deck and they won't be able to get it back. But it's also a way to stop your opponents from dealing damage to this if they really don't want to be the one to lose their life gain abilities. It's a very strong hate card, and perhaps this is what red needs. It's also just 3 mana for 3/3 with haste, so it's a decent body on top of that. Next up is the new Underworld Breach. Underworld Breach, of course, being a bit stronger. It was just 2 mana for an enchantment that says each non-land card in your graveyard has escape, and the escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost, so you can just play them, plus you exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. This meant that you can really pop off and get all of your cards back onto the battlefield. But at the beginning of your end step you had to sacrifice Underworld Breach, so this only works for 1 turn. Often. Now, the new one is a room, and it says, well, the second part, the Forgotten Cellar, says 5 mana. When you unlock this door, which you can lock and then unlock again with the commander, you may cast spells from your graveyard this turn. And if a card would be put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, you exile it instead. Playing permanents, of course, doesn't mean that they have to get back to your graveyard, so this can be an infinite value card when you want it to. So that's the stronger part. It is 3 mana more, but it also has a bit of sort of ramp attached to it. The Walking Closet, who doesn't want it? It's 3 mana to have you play lands from your graveyard, and that's also very strong in a lot of decks. So this has 2 parts that are really strong in some decks, and it has a way in the room deck to lock the door again and then unlock it later. So I think in some ways this is better than Underworld Breach. It won't be perhaps that top level, but it is still a very strong value engine. Next up is an interesting way to go about enchantments, let's say, because in many decks you will want creatures, but you also don't want them to be removed so easily, of course. Now these are the glimmers, and the glimmers are pieces of hope left in a very dark place, so they must be pretty strong. For example, Enduring Courage gives your other creatures haste and 2 extra power when they enter the battlefield. Now, this is very strong because it gives your creatures haste, and many decks want a lot of ways to give creatures haste so that they are even viable. So you need these sort of effects, but on a creature that would mean that it could get removed very easily. Well, in this case, when it dies, if it was a creature, you return it as an enchantment. That means that it is indeed enduring, and that's exactly what you need from this sort of creature. Another strong example is the Enduring Innocence, which lets you draw a card whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters. Once a turn, but if this creature would indeed endure, that's a lot of value for a small creature deck. So that's another strong way to have a creature, having it have a really strong effect and then having it stick around as well. My favorite one is a dog, because giving haste is one of my favorite things to do. Yeah, it's also very cute art. I think that, aside from the strong mechanic, will make it very popular. Next up, this is just because it's, in my eyes, really strong. It does cost 5 mana for an enchantment, so very easily can get you back into, or make you lose strength in the game. But it says enchanted player can't gain life, apparently a theme today, and whenever enchanted players dealt damage, any damage, they lose half their life rounded up. That means that it's very easy if you have a sort of red and black ping deck, which many demon decks are, or devil decks, then you can very easily get one person out of the game. Also really hard for some reason. Well, it's in this set, of course, I think that's the reason. So very cool to play, very cool art as well, and I think a strong way to make you feel strong. Next up, Kona the Rescue Beastie is a 4 mana beast survivor, and survivor means it has the survivor ability. Well, it doesn't always, but in this set it often does. And that means that we have a new ability. That's actually unique. We have Manifest Dread, for example, which is just Morph, which is why I didn't include it here. But Kona has Survival, and I think that's a little bit unique at least. It says Survival means that when it is tapped at your second main phase, at the beginning of your second main phase, you get an effect. And I think that's pretty unique. In this case, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield, which is really strong as well. Now, why is this unique? Isn't this just a belated effect after attacking? Well, no, you can tap it in other ways as well, like Convoke, as we saw earlier. And I think that makes it a little bit more unique than just an attack trigger. And we have more Laylines, which aren't new, but are really warping for some decks. For example, the Leyline of Hope, which says if you would gain life, you gain another life. And as long as you have at least 7 or more life than your starting life total, creatures you control get +2/+2, so great for a life gain deck. Leyline of Resonance is a 4 mana enchantment that can be free, because when it's in your opening hand, you may begin with it on the battlefield, like all the Laylines. And then says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only a single creature, you may copy it, so very strong for example, a feather deck. And we have Leyline of Transformation, which says choose a creature type and all creatures are the chosen type in addition to their other types, so very strong for those shapeshifter decks and creative decks that people are playing now around multiple creature types. So very strong cards, I think, that will change many decks very strongly. So look out for these if you can play them. And that was it for this set and the unique concepts of this set that can fit in Commander. I hope you liked watching, and tell me if I missed some concepts or if you have a very strong favorite. And I would like to thank you for watching again, and have a nice day.